One thing I would add on there, just my brother's wife passed away not too long ago. One of the struggles he had was just the finances, right? So, bank accounts, credit card accounts, all those type of things. Everybody does everything online now, so having access to the accounts, the passwords, all of that type of stuff. There's a lot less paperwork that you go through, finding statements and things like that.
One of the things that Kim and they knew for years that this was going to happen, so they thought they were very prepared. But so like, for example, Joe and I both have online accounts, that we access our Chase account. I'm the one who pays bills, so the bill pay portion is set up on my account. So then, when Eddie went, same thing, Kim was the bill payer. When Eddie went to do that, it wasn't, the bill pay portion wasn't set up on his account, so he's like, well, did the mortgage get taken out yet? Or is it scheduled to get taken out, or do I need to pay that? So it was just.
Ernie wouldn't have a clue.
It was logistics.
When I go, he won't have a clue.
Yeah, so it was that logistics part of it. It was just,
Right.
it was really a big mess. Because you already sent in the death certificate saying that she's passed, so they froze her, username. So when he went to his username, well, it wasn't set up. He could set it up, it just wasn't set up.
Right.
So it was just that crazy part.
I was talking to another attorney about something else. And I guess the rule of thumb out there is when someone dies, as long as there's no complications, if there's no disagreement among families, no big debts, no $1 million to be passed around, it's 6 to 12 months to get through the paperwork. If the person doing that paperwork stays on top of it from day one, it's still going to take you 6 to 12 months. Most of the time, longer. We'll see what Kathy says. She's more active in our community as a person. I told the story a few months ago of the attorney who rules in the states. Anybody remember that? I got some ugly, I got some pretty spirited responses. And that was an attorney who, in my first parish, when we were doing death and dying, used to start out every one of his sessions. He'd walk in, be very nice, thank you for the church. I'm not a member of the church, my family is. I go to the church down the road. And he'd look at people and say, so, if you hate your kids, die without a will. Then he would launch into a story that was different every time. But he had been involved with the Wrigley family, the Fields family, etc., on behalf of Continental Bank, if you go back. Made his career into trusting. And he'd go through the stories. They'd be about 15 minutes long. The details would change slightly. And they would always end with, he said, they would come to us and say, just as long as my brother, sister, whatever, doesn't get the money, I'm going. So get a continuance, fight it out. I'm not going to give in. I don't care what the will says. I don't care what the state says. We're going to fight this. And he said finally the last one, he came and that got ended, went to court, said here's a whole mess of high-priced lawyers, bankers. Judge just said, so, money about out. Yep, money's about out. Can we settle now? Yes, we can settle.
Money's gone.
So,
Yeah.
we settle, and he said, everybody gets their money, fine, we're all happy. He said the next day I picked up, I think it was the Tribune, he said pick up the newspaper. It's Wrigley Estate, Wrigley or Fields it was. Estate settled, lawyers get all the money. And he said, I didn't need that anymore. I'm walking away. Set up a small practice in Elmhurst and said, no more. Got paid well, represented well, everything was legal. And he said, just too stressful. Wasn't what my faith life was about. This is what I want to do. I'm out of this end of the law business. The lawyer we have, personal lawyer, has got old enough, high enough, senior partner, and he said, I don't do that anymore. Too painful, personally. Because that's what it ends up. They walk into the lawyers and say, just as long as my brother or my sister doesn't get it, I don't care. Well, when it's done, they care. So part of that gets, and some people got some pretty strong reaction. Poor Kathy is here. It was interesting, I said Wednesday, I might as well say it here. We have 4 attorneys in the congregation. So when we did this class, I said, would you come in and do this? 3 said no. just said, because it's not their practice. One I do a personal injury, one I do a civil, one I do a criminal defense. Not my expertise. You need somebody that's more up in that. We don't do our own. We go to somebody, friend that's a specialist in that. So we would not be comfortable unless you were desperate. Because I did get all three of them to agree they knew more about wills and estates than I did. But they were reluctant to do that. Now, when the newest attorney in the congregation said, I've done that and I have a presentation I've done with that, all three said, that's who you want to do that. So it's, it's a specialty. It's not easy. And not easy, I think, because of legal. It's not that they're not intelligent, but I think the emotional end of this is where we struggle. And I remember Mark, when Ray Lane was doing that, and still picture that. And I can't recite the details of the stories, but they're all the same. I don't care, just as long as, I don't care. Then it gets settled, and says, well, the lawyers should blame. So I have a little bit of affinity and sympathy for those lawyers going, you sit there and tell me this is what I want, this is what I want. Then you give them what they want, and you're the bad. So I can see why attorneys, God bless her, we'll see. As I said, Kathy Reed is actually the newest attorney in the congregation. We do the class in 10 years, Kathy may not be doing this.
Well,
She's got a big heart,
I
so I just
think
wonder if she'll do it.
when it comes to maybe an attorney or anybody who handles that, all the hospice workers as well. They are just a godsend. I mean, they get attached to a family, and you might think you're only going to be there for a month, and then you're there for a year because this person still hangs on. I mean, but I would think, especially if they're a 12-hour, 24-hour, right?
Yeah.
They have a calling themselves.
And that has changed so much. You don't get to that part till you're actually actively dying.
Yeah. Well,
So
and
the
to be able
hospice
to work,
services are
to go through that
changed a lot.
all the time though. I mean, how draining I would think that would have to be.
Yes.
A lot of them are volunteers.
Mhm.
Really? See, I didn't know that.
A lot of hospice workers are volunteers. So,
Okay.
If we talk about it, I was tempted. It was quite a rewarding ministry when I was doing that in school. I remember Doris and I talking, it was one of the things I looked at and said, I don't know what would take this to home. And I have a good pastor friend is the head chaplain for Rainbow Hospice. And when John went into that, I said, short-term, fine. And he's lasted longer and found his niche. The interesting part is, John only preaches if he's absolutely has to on Sunday morning. So he didn't enjoy preaching. He said, my ministry's taken me another place where I find preparing and delivering a Sunday sermon difficult. I can preach a funeral service, but Sunday morning funeral, very difficult. So it's just a different set of skills and mindsets. A little shocked when we had that discussion a few years ago. Because John was a good preacher, and I heard him at confirmation camp with junior highs. He was effective, and just said, I couldn't do it that way. Other things. I think I'm getting close to my time. How much time have I got left?
3 minutes.
Good, thank you.
Got a clock running here.
I did.
you're still in
3 minutes, okay, so I can do a short children's sermon, can't do a long. So that's it, any questions, comments? Anything?
Now that you mentioned children and
That happened in our lifetime, so. One of the neighbors just passed away, 7 years old.
Oh, children's.
well, that's not what I meant.
Oh, I thought that was what we were talking about.
What do you mean?
What about like
She
you
passed
have,
No, but I mean, what is Lillian?
Yeah, what is the lady?
Well, children and how to,
Do a children's sermon ad?
well,
I've done that.
what's that, yeah.
And of course, Economist is, I think, one of the national leaders in children in death, including them. But it's not popular with everybody in our community. I mean, I'll say that. There are people who will not bring their children. And they'll make that very clear. And when I came here, around the funeral and death, there was quite a bit of controversy.
No, when Mark Southern died,
sister and I talk about the fact, she's a grade school teacher in Texas. We talk about the fact that we were older professionals before we realized not everybody took their kids to funerals. It was not on to my parents. We
And
went,
I grew up with the same tradition, it was.
somebody died, we were on our way.
We went to the funeral homes, we went to the funerals. That was
And we
part
knew
of-
as kids, that was where you saw this stuff.
That was part of life.
That's part, right?
Yeah.
You shelter
So we
them,
get that
when
professional and
it's
realize that
their
was
own
not,
family member.
that was not all very true.
That much harder.
I'll end with a funny story, with my mother's funeral. What had happened is the community had changed. And the customs had changed from the time my sister and I. So my father died first. And when we went there, we had children. It was clear the funeral director was very uncomfortable. He looked at us in shock when we said, we're going to have little kids here. Well, what would you do that for? Don't you shield them? No, we're going to bring them. So we did. It did not go well. Especially the moms weren't too happy with it. It was very uncomfortable. Didn't do anything at the service. We got to the grave side and had the kids come forward and talk a little bit about the grave and the casket and all and what had happened, the little guys. And when we walked away, her pastor said, I've never seen that. We don't do that here. So he and I got into a little bit of discussion about that. Conley's had a nice pack in those days I sent him, and the funeral director, of dealing with children in grief. A few years later, my mother dies. We go back and same funeral director. So I want to be a little sensitive to him, but at the same time, we're going to include our children, and now there's more children afterwards. But we got to the cemetery, and I didn't think about doing that again. I talked a little bit about my kids ahead of time, niece, nephews. And my mother's godson brought his children, came up and said, aren't you going to do what you did at your dad's funeral? I brought my children for that purpose. So we go and we sit the kids down on dirt. There's a pile of dirt nearby, and I do a little bit. I don't remember, I don't think it was very much, but I did something. And then he and I went walking off. Well, not only was that not okay, that the funeral director hadn't seen it, but the cemetery person came up and said, we don't do that here. That's not allowed in the cemetery, what you just did. And I said, fine. I didn't know what to tell you. I did it.
I won't do it next time.
I'm not going to.
We're done.
I know, we're done.
We'll do it next time.
When we were, the godson and I went walking over to his mother had died meanwhile, so we went over, and there was some laughter between he and I over our moms being together. Mike, his comment was, do you suppose God will have any peace in heaven now that those two are there? And then we got the laughing. Our mothers came over from Germany, were translators. So in Germany, there's different dialects, like we have North and South, they have it. And our mothers got on the telephone, and they would mix the dialects, and they would mix their English in all in one sentence. So the other comment that one of us made, that got great laughter was, A, do you think God has any peace? And B, it's only God and the two of them that can understand what they're talking about, because they got their own language. When I went back, some years we went back last year, we did Dorothy's funeral. When I went back down there, we started talking about this. Now I've got my sister, who's a grade school teacher, and the woman being buried is a teacher. So now this kind of stuff is no longer optional. We talk about doing some different things. So I walked over to the cemetery work, and he says, we'd like to do a few different things. He goes, yeah. I said, my predecessor never allowed that. He said, I don't understand that. Just whatever you want to do. Just let me know when you're ready.
Yeah.
But find the different attitudes that you find when you go into customs, when you deal with families and funeral directors. In Chicago, we got a lot of different, I can't imagine what it'd be if I had to go across the country, how they do things differently. But, we have our different ideas. We need to pass them on. But also, we also want to be respectful for everybody there. Different cultures, different families, and different traditions. Some of those are going to be funny we hear about next week. Some of those, maybe not.
I think even when we first came here, our kids were, like Birch Stonecipher, they
Yeah.
stayed at the grave site to watch them lower him on.
I think with my parents, that was one thing. They're up in Columbia, South Dakota, but it was almost like you were told, no, you can't stand here. It's like, can I watch my dad be buried, be lowered into the ground? No, like you all have to leave. Why? You know, I mean, there was not a question, and it was my oldest sister who was in charge of everything, which was great. But it's like, why can't, is there a law? I mean, but again, it was like, well, maybe it was just the old little cemetery rules there or something.
Yeah.
And some of my cousins were on the board and said, no, we just never do that. Why? You know, so when it came to my mom's, it was almost like there was a little uncertainty, are we going to be able to watch mom's casket go into the ground or not? Or that the kids could throw flowers, you know, once she was lowered onto that. It was little stuff, again, when it comes to the planning, it's like, okay, I guess you don't even know, you have to go all, not just with the funeral home, but, okay, the cemetery might have rules.
They do, and I think most of it, you'll get into some of that next 2 weeks. I think it's not, some of it's out of, how do I say, I suppose Granger would say sort of out of denial, or, you know, let's protect people, let's not put people through this. You know, there's people that have already come, well, you're not gonna talk about funeral planning. I'm not gonna talk about telecoms. If I sit down and plan it now, it's like I wanna die. No, you're gonna die. It'd be a lot easier on the pastor and family if you've got some things down on paper for us. Otherwise, I mean, I sit here, that kind of thing. Probably my record would be about, I sit here for 2 or 3 hours with families, looking for a verse or a hymn. And then they walk out and say, well, you and yours are going to figure it out. Well, I didn't.
My service.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Okay, my favorite, you want to but that's often left. And I think cemeteries, some families put that down and say, well, we want to spare the family homes. Well, you might be sparing somebody, but creating another problem.
Maybe the family needs the closure.
Yeah, whatever action is going to happen, I think that's what Granger. Not everybody's going to do that. Not everybody's going to find the same thing helpful.
I think we saw that at Ernie's dad's funeral. He had always said he wanted a closed casket. He said if they couldn't come and see me when I was living, they don't need to come and see me when I'm dead.
Like that.
But that set off a lot of his brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And he did it more out of a selfish reason as opposed to, some people need that physical looking at in order to have their closure. So it was a little, I think they did open the casket up because of that whole hubbub right before the service. They did.
Got family.
So,
Yeah, he was pretty clear. So were they. Just, you know, said, you know, funeral director did it. It was fine. We did it for family. We just said our goodbyes. We felt it was necessary and wasn't respecting that. But we did the visitation. We did hear about that. Forgot about that.
My parents, we had the viewing of the body before, you know, a different day before the service.
and actually, we had to take a picture of his dad because his
Oh.
sister was 9 months
That's right.
pregnant and couldn't even come.
They wouldn't let her go and come up. And so it was
That's right.
very difficult for her.
So that's a question I got. Is that getting to be a normal thing, people taking pictures? What about the hair thing? You know what I'm talking about?
Keeping lots of it.
Yeah, they got to it. There was, someone I know that his brother passed away and he started the whole, he took hair clippings and put it in an envelope and asked, just give me the same. No, he had it was, given out to the people who came to the funeral.
We've had family requests.
Yeah.
Picture the same thing.
Well, it was a little thing in the envelope that was, I don't know if it ever caught on or didn't catch on, but,
He's right
it happened.
I just had a whole nother.
Just start picking mine now, huh? Before it's all gone? Start saving mine now. Yeah, exactly.
Could be like a collector's item.
I gotta start mine now.
After you shower, just put that in a little tub.
Well, his point was, he was
Here,
taking
baby.
pieces of his brother, everyone who came to the funeral. That's why Dan started the whole thing. And I didn't know if it caught on or not, but he just didn't know that. It's like, it's been
I
years,
remember
so.
that.
And that's what happened at his funeral too. Where Sandy actually, there was pieces of his hair in an envelope that was given out to each and every person who came to the funeral.
Yeah, I understand.
You never seen it? It might catch on.
Did he have really great hair?
Mine just handed out peanut butter cups.
I'm glad my garden too. Was that what you did with yours? You're putting yours aside?
Yes, we'll do it, Mike.
Thank you.